ran on a platform of changing Washington, and that started last week. And you saw that debate, and it was a healthy debate. Frankly, it was a debate that needed to happen years ago. And so once we got through that, we had to formalize it in the rules package, and we did. And then we went to work. And the first thing we did is delivering on the promises that we made during the campaign. We made a commitment to America. We said the first bill we're going to take up is the bill to repeal those 87,000 IRS agents. And Adrian Smith is now, you have the plaque? So he's got the plaque. With the result of the vote, 221 votes yesterday. Every Republican voted for it. Every Democrat voted against it. And think about this. Yesterday, every Democrat went on record saying that they want to more than double the size of the IRS to go after people like the hardworking families, the single mom who's working 2 shifts at a restaurant. The CBO confirmed that when they added those IRS agents, it wasn't just to go after the millionaires and billionaires, it was to go after people making less than $200,000 a year. Broke President Biden's pledge. We actually had an amendment when that bill was going through to say that the new IRS agents couldn't go after people making less than $400,000, to hold President Biden to his own pledge. Do you know every Democrat voted against that amendment? And so those IRS agents would be set up to go after hardworking families across this country. Frankly, what we need is more Border Patrol agents securing America's border, not IRS agents going after hardworking families in America. And so we passed that bill. And we're going to pass more good bills this week. You're going to see us today set up the Select Subcommittee on China to finally confront the challenge that is one of the greatest threats to our nation, and that is what the Chinese Communist Party has been doing all around the globe, making challenges to our country and other countries around the world. We're going to set up that church committee to look at some of these federal agencies that are weaponizing government to go after families across this country based on their political views. That's not what government should be doing. We're going to be looking into that as well. We're going to pass the Born Alive Act. This is a bill we talked about a long time. In fact, every Republican was a co-sponsor of this bill last Congress, and Nancy Pelosi wouldn't bring it up to a vote. And in our first full week, we're going to actually bring that bill up for a vote. Ann Wagner's bill that says if a baby's born alive outside the womb, in some states they actually are allowing that baby to be killed and calling it abortion. It's murder, and yet it's legal in some states. Even people that identify as pro-choice think that that's disgusting and immoral and shouldn't be allowed in America, and yet it is. And so we're going to confront that too. And then we're going to set up our committees. You saw yesterday we finished out the chairmanships. We're going to start populating the committees. And then the committees are going to get to work, bringing bills out that'll actually address inflation, allow us to lower costs for families, fighting for those families who have had nobody fighting for them in Washington for years, for way too long. Washington has needed to change, and last week we started that process. Last night we culminated it with the rules package, and now we get to work implementing it, and that's ultimately what matters, is getting the job done for those families who are struggling all across this country. And we're excited, and we're up to the challenge. We're ready to get to work. With that, we'd be happy to take your questions. Yes.
I have 2 questions. The first for you and then the other for Congressman Emmer. The first is, given all that we know now about what Congressman Santos lied about his resume, the various inquiries into him at the federal and local level, do you think that he should be a member of Congress?
Well, you saw him seated last week. There were no challenges to that. This is something that's being handled internally. Obviously, there were concerns about what we had heard. And so we're going to have to sit down and talk to him about it. And that's something that we're going to deal with, just like there's a lot of other things we're going to deal with.
I have a second question for Congressman
Tom.
You were in the negotiations last week. There's a lot of conversation around whether or not there's this 3-page addendum, these other negotiations and deals that were made with Freedom Caucus members. Can you confirm, like, is there an addendum? Is this an official piece of paper, or is this just a word-of-mouth agreement?
There's no addendum. I wouldn't call it an addendum. I think our speaker put it up on the screen today and showed people. It reinstitutes the Holman rule. It eliminates the Gephardt rule. There will be single subject matter bills. There will be germaneness issues are going to be important. He made it very clear that there were no gavels given out. There were no deals like that were made. This is, I think it's more than just aspirational. I think it literally is something that the entire conference is going to want to hold ourselves to, and frankly, hold our partners on the other side of the building to. but I wouldn't call it an addendum because that was the confusion yesterday. We were voting on a rules package that literally had some minor wording changes in the church language and then had the motion to vacate number changed. This discussion is about something totally separate. And in fact, somebody from downtown, I understand, was circulating a document saying this is the addendum that you're voting. Well, no, that's something totally separate. And I think the majority leader can certainly comment on it. So can Michael. That I think the speaker literally put a screen up today showing everybody what's in it.
But Mr. Leader, in that regard, why not release to the public all these deals that were reached, this screenshot that was shown in conference? You guys talk about transparency. Isn't it essential for the American public to understand exactly what deals were cut in order for him to get the speaker?
Well, the speaker talked about that today, and some of the things involved making sure that our committees are represented by a full swath of our membership. It wasn't any person was committed a committee, but look, we've got a lot of different groups within our conference. The Democrats do as well, by the way, and we want to make sure, and this is something the steering committee is going to take up. So again, it wasn't like this person's allowed that spot on a committee. The steering committee is going to make that decision. But if we're going to be able to do our business, I'd love for the Democrats to vote with us. For example, this week, we're going to have a bill to say if the Strategic Petroleum Reserve is rated like President Biden has rated it over and over again, taken over 40% of our nation's reserve away, not to fix a national emergency, but to mask his really bad anti-American energy policies, then it shouldn't be sold to China. I hope every Democrat votes with us to say that America's national reserve for oil shouldn't be sold to China like President Biden did recently. But if Democrats don't work with us to solve these problems, we're going to still do it on our own. And so that means the committees have to produce bills that come out of committee that represent the full swath of our conference. And so that's something the steering committee is going to take up. And those decisions, but let's recognize those decisions haven't been finalized yet because the steering committee, starting tomorrow, will go in to take up all of the committee's slots that have to be filled. The ratios have to be finalized. And then ultimately, what bills come to the floor, those are decisions through regular order that are going to be established. We'll have a term limits bill that we're going to bring to the floor, but it was clear it's got to go through regular order. Which means we're going to have committees in person again. By the way, last night, not only did we get rid of proxy voting, we got rid of virtual hearings in committees. So committees can't be meeting in these Brady box style boxes where nobody's in a room and everybody's in some remote location and you can't even discuss an amendment. We're going to be back in person again, and we're going to be having field hearings. We're going to have the Judiciary Committee having a hearing on this open border at the border. We could actually go have that hearing at the place where the problem is happening. That's going to be exciting for people to see. Yeah.
As far as we're hearing now, once again, that Mr. McCarthy wants to block Mr. Swalwell, Mr. Schiff, and Ms. Omar from their committees. Now, we've seen this thing before with Marjorie Taylor Greene and Mr. Gosar. Is it going to be the same process where it will involve the entire Congress, or will it be a different process considering it will involve the Intel Committee? Can you explain what the process will be?
Yeah, well, first of all, nobody has been assigned to any of those committees yet, but as we see what comes out, the Democrats set a precedent that we urged them strongly not to go down last Congress. They decided that they were going to break the precedent that had been in place over 200 years and remove members of the opposing party that our party selected to be on committees. And so that was a practice they set. And so obviously we're going to be looking very closely at who they appoint. They hadn't appointed anybody yet to committees, but we're going to see if they do.
What has been agreed to on the debt ceiling? Specifically, there seems to be some confusion. And can you guarantee the U.S. public we will not default on our debt?
Well, let's first make very clear why the debt ceiling gets hit. And I think this is an important education process to have now and an important conversation to have now because we haven't hit the debt ceiling yet. But America, over time, occasionally hits the debt ceiling because it's like a credit card limit. And families back home if they have credit cards, they have a limit on that credit card. And if they hit their limit or they're very close to it, which we are, it means you've spent more money than you have. You've spent more money than your credit card has allowed you to spend. And if you're going to ask for an increase in the limit, at some point in time, you've got to sit down and say, why are we hitting the limit? Why are we maxing out the credit card? Because this is the nation's credit card. And frankly, It's not us, but next generations that are going to have to pay this. Debt is not something that's just innocuous. It's going to ultimately have to be paid by somebody, and that's future generations. And so if the country is spending more money than we have, and it's trillions of dollars, by the way, and Joe Biden, you saw, trillions and trillions of dollars in bills to rack up debt that ultimately somebody's going to have to pay. There is no free lunch. And so if we're about to max out the credit card, then before we hit that limit, shouldn't we have an honest conversation about how to start living within our means, how to make sure we're not spending money that we don't have before that comes up? And when that comes up, at the same time you're dealing with the debt limit, you ought to also put in mechanisms in place so that you don't keep maxing it out. Because if the limit gets raised, you don't go to the store the next day and just max it out again. You start figuring out how to control the spending problem. And this has been going on for way too long, and we're going to confront this, and I think the American people have called on us to confront this problem. Yes, back in the back. We're going to go in the back. Yeah. No, and in fact, we haven't talked about reducing defense spending. We've talked about bringing accountability to government. A government has needed accountability for a long time, and we've seen none of that over the last 2 years. You know, whether it's the origins of COVID, where everybody in America has asked that question at some point in time. You know, we were told it was, you know, some bat biting a cat, and the cat bit some guy in the wet market in Wuhan. And now scientists are looking at it saying that's probably not what happened. It's probably a genetically manipulated disease that was probably manipulated in the lab in Wuhan, and yet Democrats refuse to let us even talk about that over the last 2 years. We're going to be investigating things like that. We're going to talk about accountability on spending in every federal agency. And if agencies if there's waste, fraud, and abuse in any agency, it's got to be rooted out. And so that's what we've been talking about, is how to aggressively root out waste, fraud, and abuse with taxpayer dollars. And it started with the IRS bill last night that Adrian passed. Right over here. We'll come to you next. Wait, I'm sorry, can you repeat that? Speaker McCarthy laid that out today to the membership. And again, there's still some decisions that have to be made, like the steering committee will be meeting to fill out the rest of the committees. That hasn't been decided yet. We don't even know which members are going to go for which committees in some of those cases. But at the end of the day, we want our committees to reflect our conference if we want to get bills out to the floor to pass, because as the whip knows, you don't want to wait until a bill's on the floor to recognize that there might be an issue. You take care of those issues in committee, and that's why you want the entire conference represented, the different groups within our conference represented on the various committees, and we're going to be working to do that right here.
Steve,
Oh.
I find it hard to
You
believe.
want to come in?
No. I find it hard to believe that you all don't have a copy of the screenshot already.
That's, we usually hear about that. We'll go here and then we'll go to Chad's.
Discovery of Biden's classified documents. In the case of Mar-a-Lago, they were intentionally withheld, the classified documents, for more than a year, whereas with Biden's classified documents, those were voluntarily turned over. Does that make a difference in your judgment?
Well, first of all, do we really know that for years, when Vice President Biden left office, it looks like he took classified documents with him, and he was very critical of President Trump. By the way, the only person that has the constitutional ability to declassify any documents is the President of the United States, not the Vice President. So if then Vice President Biden took classified documents with him and held them for years and criticized former President Trump during that same time that he had those classified documents, and only after it was uncovered did he turn them back, I wonder why the press isn't asking the same questions of him as Vice President taking classified documents that they were asking President Trump.
The Justice Department would indicate equal
What
treatment.
about the looking at that vote last week for the Speaker, the series of votes here, why should we not think that almost every one of these big policy issues that you're going to endure is going to be right on the edge, 3 or 4 votes, all the drama, whether it be cutting spending, even the abortion bill, some of these things are very controversial. Why is that pass not prologue for the rest of the next 2 years?
Well, with a 5-seat majority, if you have a few people that are absent because there are family issues back home, you know, we saw that some members had to get back home to a loved one that had a health issue, and that ultimately is something. Look, nobody said any of this is going to be easy. Fixing the problems of the country is complicated because they're huge problems. These aren't small problems that our country is facing. The good news is we've got a majority that all from various philosophies, people from different walks of life, all came here to help solve problems. And these are big problems. It's going to take a lot of work. It's going to take committees doing a lot of work to ultimately get the policy right. What's important is not the margin of the vote, but making sure we get the policies right to fight for those hardworking families who have been left behind by Washington for far too long. And it's going to be an exciting process to watch. I think people are going to be tuned in like they were last week. Look forward to talking to you soon.
Oh, that's fancy. Hey, Tom, folks are ready. We're gonna start a little early. Just want to give you a early. Yeah, it's a new day. It's a new day in the OKC. I can't promise this every time.
These two not 30 minutes.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to be with three of our ranking members and our distinguished vice chair at this press conference. House Democrats are ready. In the 118th Congress, we stand united behind Hakeem Jeffries, whose leadership is astounding, bold, courageous, decisive, You get the point. The chaos and crisis on the other side of the aisle has not stopped House Republicans. After caving to demands from extremists in their conference, Speaker McCarthy has a secret 3-page list of promises that will prevent his caucus that he had to put in place to prevent his caucus from voting down their own rules package. Rather than trying to find common ground, House Republicans have chosen a path of division and default. We've not seen a single concrete proposal from Republican leadership that will lower costs for everyday Americans. Instead, they've ratcheted up their attacks on women's reproductive rights, against voting rights legislation, and against codifying Roe v. Wade. When they're ready to get serious about the most pressing issues of facing this country, House Democrats stand ready to work with them to deliver. Until then, we're going to continue to call out their extremism each and every step of the way. Our Vice Chair, Ted Lieu.
Thank you, Chairman Aguilar, and good morning. Last week, the American people saw a clear contrast between a unified Democratic caucus working on behalf of the American people and the chaos, confusion, crisis of the Republican caucus who've been captured by MAGA extremists. And this contrast continues this week. So while Democrats are putting people over politics and working to lower costs and get better paying jobs and safer communities, what is the very first thing Republicans do? The very first bill they pass? It guts the Office of Government Ethics. Essentially, when you read what they say, you cannot hire any staff after 30 days for that important office, which means if any staff has to leave, relocate, resign, for whatever reason, leave the office, they cannot be replaced. So over time, this office could shrink to nothing. And why do Republicans want to do that? Well, they want to stop investigations into themselves. And we see that again with what's going to be voted on today, which is their committee to obstruct justice. They're going to create a committee to meddle into ongoing law enforcement investigations. Some of these investigations are investigating Republican members of Congress, as well as the former failed president. So that is what the American people are seeing, and that contrast will continue to play out week after week after week. And now it's my honor to introduce our terrific ranking member of Appropriations, Rosa DeLauro.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Good morning. Pleasure to be with all of you today, and I want to say a thank you to Chairman Aguilar, Vice Chairman Lieu, for inviting me to join the press conference this morning, and also to thank my colleagues, Chairman Neal and Chairman Boyle, for their leadership. As my colleagues have mentioned, the Republicans' chaotic process to elect a Speaker of the House, it's unprecedented, and it's also dangerous. Republicans are making side agreements, handshake deals that not only contradict their calls for transparency, but also attempt to short-circuit the 2024 government funding process before it even gets started. Appropriations bills are must-pass bills. They require bipartisan, bicameral agreement, like the House Democratic majority secured when we passed the agreement funding the omnibus bill in December. It appears, quite honestly, that Republicans, they don't understand this process, because in his attempt to become Speaker, Kevin McCarthy reportedly already promised to cap spending at the 2022 levels in exchange for votes. Let me just take a second to tell you about what that means. Now, obviously, we do not have the exact cut that the Speaker traded for votes because the deal was made in secret. But there's a discussion that the cut from 2023 would apply to all discretionary spending, defense and non-defense. That's at least a $130 billion cut to all discretionary spending. That's about an 8% cut. If you take it all from non-defense, it is at about a 17% cut. And while there are some House Republicans saying that they will not cut national security, they would then leave veterans in the lurch. Taking the veterans programs back to 2022 would shortchange VA medical care by at least $31 billion. That's a 32% below what we just enacted in December. It doesn't account for potential increases the department will identify on their upcoming budget requests. So they're going to slash what are critical investments. And as I said, it's defense, national security, military readiness, and a combat capability. And again, I make reference to service members and their families. The funds that they rely on, this is cuts to VA medical care, mental health services, the homeless assistance programs that ensure that we reach unhoused veterans. They will be making serious cuts to law enforcement. These spending cuts harm families, communities throughout the U.S. that are already struggling with inflation and the cost of living. It is not just a soundbite to say that people are living in this country today paycheck to paycheck. It is a reality. So the funding for high poverty schools, post-secondary education, early learning programs hang in the balance. Access to childcare, training programs are at risk. We will cut the benefits for small businesses. But I guess my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, they consider that all of these services are unimportant, not to be taken into consideration, because you know as well as I know that budgets are statements of values. And it tells you precisely where their values are or are not. In our bills, we provided 43.5 million people the SNAP benefits they need. This past year alone, our bills created over 21,500 affordable housing units. Progress made to help those in most need put food on their table, roof over their heads. All of that is jeopardized. Republicans have created an institution that governs in the shadows at the expense of hardworking families, and a speaker who traded funding that helps communities, that protects our national security for personal gain. I hope this dangerous trend is reversed soon, and that transparency is restored to the government funding process. And with that, let me introduce to you the chair of the Ways and Means Committee, Congressman Richard Neal.
Thanks, Rosa. Thanks to the leadership team here for having us get out front on some of the issues that we're going to confront in the course of the next few months. So even for those of you who had a chance to witness the debate last night on their first funding bill, $114 billion it adds to the national deficit. And if you listen to the debate last night, I also thought what was compelling to the battle, they came unarmed. It was pretty remarkable to listen to the back and forth last night, where we dealt with facts and specificity, and they dealt once again in generalities and kind of empty talk. What I also think is noteworthy is we get to what eventually will be a vote on the debt ceiling. And certainly putting the question in front of the American people. They voted for the CARES Act. They voted for more money for national defense spending. Some of them voted for the infrastructure bill. And then they also voted for $5 trillion worth of tax cuts in 2001, 2003, and 2017. Although it comes out to about $4.7 trillion of tax cuts. And it allows them, in this instance, after what they've done, to sort of set the fire and then call the fire department. So it's been kind of the recklessness that they've embraced in this fiscal debate and discussion, but it's going to bring us to the precipice because it'll allow us to have a full throttle debate over the role of Social Security and Medicare in our lives. I'm looking forward to that. It's really important to remember, as I've just described it, where the tax cuts were, where the spending increases came from, and then how we intend to defend Social Security and Medicare and do the responsible thing and raise the debt ceiling. The debt ceiling shouldn't be held hostage to this sort of conversation, particularly when you participated in increased spending, which, by the way, was all valid. All valid. The CARES Act. Speaker Pelosi and I, with Secretary Mnuchin, we negotiated that legislation in her office. Many of you were witness to it when you saw the final product, and we came out of the Speaker's office at the time, with Secretary Mnuchin calling in back and forth over 8 days. They all voted for it. And I call attention to that because now they want to say, well, we're not going to raise the debt ceiling until you agree to irresponsible cuts in domestic spending. Better to have the discussion right now. Let's set the table. Let's get to the debate over Social Security and Medicare. Happy to engage. Brendan Boyle.
Thank you for that wonderful introduction, Richie.
Didn't want to overdo it.
So I'm Brendan Boyle, Brendan, not Brandon, incoming ranking member of the Budget Committee. And actually, let me build off what Richie just said and focus on one area as part of the adopted rules package last night, and that's cut go. You know, you can always tell when there's a Democrat in the White House because their Republican colleagues suddenly become concerned again about deficit and debt. When there's a Republican in the White House, they conveniently forget that topic. But every time they take over and there's a Democrat in the White House, suddenly there's this focus on deficit and debt. Well, here's the hypocrisy in what they're saying. As part of Cutco that they reinstated last night, any tax cuts that they propose do not have to be offset. So all of those critical investments that Chair DeLauro spoke about, critical investments in the American people, education, jobs creation, helping veterans, all of those have to be offset according to their rules. But another big round of tax cuts, like what they did the last time they were in the majority, $2 trillion tax cut, 83% of which went to the wealthiest 1%, not one dime of that would have to be offset. So keep that in mind when they're crying crocodile tears about our national debt. I would also say, as Chairman Neal did, the debt ceiling should not ever be something we play around with. It is too dangerous. This country has been able to get through and weather government shutdowns. We would not be able to weather a compromise on the full faith and credit of the United States. It would cripple not only the U.S. economy, but the world economy. This caucus has the responsible position not to play politics with this. The other side has been threatening repeatedly, as recently as last night, to refuse to raise the debt ceiling because they're so hell-bent on cutting Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. We won't let them get away with it. And now it's my pleasure to bring back our chairman, Pete Aguilar.
Thanks, Brendan. Questions?
Chairman Aguilar, Age of Ideas with CBS News. Should the discovery of President Biden's classified documents been disclosed before the midterms?
Well, let's step back and talk about this for a minute because, and I appreciate the question. This is Republican hypocrisy at its finest. When the former president had 320 documents found at his personal residence, they said that, quote, that will not be a priority. What President Biden did was disclose this to the archives, let law enforcement know. That is exactly the way that you should handle this. So we're going to support the fact that the president is following this established protocol, that he did the right thing, and see what other and see where we go from here. But we're not interested. Republicans aren't interested in having meaningful oversight. They're just interested in opposing this president.
What do you say to, I'm so sorry.
Go ahead.
What do you say to critics who argue these documents were discovered November 2nd, midterms were November 8th, and they could have been withheld to avoid potential damage against Democrats before the midterms?
This was done in consultation. You saw Merrick Garland have a U.S. attorney weigh in at this point. This is being done the exact way, getting the archives involved. Someone who was on the January 6th committee, there is a process to handling documents. The president is handling it the way he should. That's what's important here. Go ahead.
To follow up on that, though, I mean, in April we knew about well, in August we knew about the search warrant executed at Mar-a-Lago. Isn't that sort of a sure we don't have any of our own. Isn't this a little bit sloppy to not have this go through things on the Democrat side to make sure that when they're saying this is terrible, he has documents, also make sure that we don't have any documents?
I don't think that's a question for me. That might be a question directed down the street. But what I'll tell you is this is being done. This is being handled the way he should. This is not about August. This is about today. Where we are at. The president is handling this the way that he should. He's disclosing it. He's letting the archives know. Law enforcement is aware. We're handling this with the seriousness at which it deserves. But we're not downplaying this, which is exactly what House Republicans have done. Did you have something, Richard?
No, just to say the Justice Department has the issue.
Yeah.
Can I ask you about House ethics? Obviously, Leader Jeffries announced some assignments on the committee today, but Republicans have tried to gut the committee with, various provisions that they've released. Obviously, George Santos is now a member of Congress. You guys talked about, obviously limited things you could do before he was seated, but now he's a member of Congress. What are your plans?
I'm going to yield to Vice Chair Lou, who talked about the Republican rules package in the Office of Congressional Ethics. Kevin McCarthy owns George Santos, lock, stock, and barrel. If George Santos wasn't seated, what would the math have been for Speaker McCarthy? He would have had to flip another vote or get two people to vote present. I mean, this is he owns George Santos. That's the only reason why he was seated, is to give George Santos that ability to vote for Kevin McCarthy. So let's call this exactly what it is. There should be repercussions. The state and federal governments and the law enforcement agencies should look into it. The FEC should look into this. I know that there might be an ethics complaint that's filed here as well, but this is an incredibly serious issue from someone who clearly is divorced from reality and sanity. But this is at the feet of Kevin McCarthy, not just George Santos alone. Vice Chair Lou.
Thank you, Chairman Aguilar. So the Republican rules package says that you cannot hire any staff to the Office of Government Ethics after 30 days. Why would they do that? You should ask them, what is the rationale for doing that? Well, the rationale is to shrink this office, because if anyone leaves after 30 days, they don't get replaced. And eventually, there's going to be no one in that office, because they don't want the office investigating people like George Santos. And as Chairman Aguilar noted, arguably George Santos was the deciding vote for Kevin McCarthy for Speaker. It was also disclosed yesterday that when George Santos was fundraising, apparently his fundraising person was telling folks that he was actually Kevin McCarthy's chief of staff. So if they were using the telephones, which I assume they were, that would essentially be conspiracy to commit wire fraud. So what George Santos did was not only unethical, it appears to be highly illegal. And you have ethical investigations, but also you have what looks to me like criminal liability. I think Speaker McCarthy needs to talk about what he thinks about George Santos and really put him up for condemnation or an expulsion vote from this Congress.
Just one last point on that. If George Santos wasn't seated, I might be giving another nominating speech, and so we could still be going at this. Garrett and then Leanne.
Nobody wants that.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you. 9. You didn't like anything with one of the 9? Come on, Garrett.
We're good. Here's are populating committees this week. Speaker McCarthy's reiterated his desire to not seat Adam Schiff or Eric Swalwell on the Select Committee on Intel, should their names be put forward. Is it the caucus's intention to put their names forward to be seated on that committee? And what happens if Speaker McCarthy follows through on that threat and strikes them from the Intel Committee?
That's a steering for Leader Jeffries, as well as a steering and policy committee. So steering and policy will meet once we have the ratios in negotiation with the majority. We'll have those ratios. We will populate our committees, and we will send the names of the individuals who this caucus supports and are qualified to serve on committees. What the speaker does beyond that is something that we will handle, and I know you have a bunch of hypotheticals for me, but it isn't anything that we're going to get into today. So the process.
The chairman, presumably he's not going to be left out of the bottom on a
The,
ratio question.
the process is that the caucus will advance the nominees and the individuals who we feel best reflect the Democratic caucus, our democratic values, and have the ability to lead, including ranking member Schiff. And so they will be put forward. What the speaker does beyond that is something that that the leadership team and the steering and policy committee will have to handle. Leanne?
A committee question. Today the House is going to vote on this new select subcommittee on the weaponization of the federal government. Democrats are going to have seats on this committee. Do you plan to seat Democrats on that committee? And also, Representative Omar has publicly suggested that she would be interested on that committee. So is she being considered for it?
There's a process, we call that the tinfoil hat committee in our caucus. There's a process by which members will raise their hands and let leadership know what they're interested in. It is our intent to seat members on every subcommittee, every select committee, every subcommittee that the leadership on the majority side advances. It's in our best interest to make sure we are representing the will of the caucus and the American public, and that Republicans don't have an opportunity behind closed doors to shape and to add to these conspiracy theories. That is not in the interest of the American public. And by the way, none of these issues that they are advancing have anything to do with lowering costs that Americans are facing. This is all about campaign promises and a secret 3-page document that none of us have seen that was the path for Kevin McCarthy to become Speaker. And so we're going to continue to do the business of the people each and every step of the way. Let's go over here.
For Chairwoman DeLauro, Caitlin with Politico, how do you plan to appropriate around this handshake agreement to set spending levels at fiscal 2022 levels? I mean, presumably, at the very least, we'll need a CR, which is going to be at fiscal 23 levels. So how do you plan to actually get this, fund the government, get this done, avoid a partial shutdown, and work around what McCarthy's promised conservatives?
Well, I think that my point is that you cannot pass appropriations bills without them being both bipartisan and bicameral. So the president will not sign. So I think this notion that you can deal with 2022 levels, if that appears to have been part of this secret deal, that you then may be looking at guaranteeing a shutdown. We will operate in the way that we have, bill by bill, with the issues that are important to us. I tend to, you don't want to work. I think it's very interesting to note that in a divided government, last December, you may recall, we passed an omnibus bill, a bipartisan omnibus bill. 9 Republican votes in the House, and I think close to 19, somewhere around that, in the Senate. So we were able to govern. The issue is going to be is whether or not the Republican majority can govern. But we are going to, as I say, we will work together, we will cooperate, but we are not backing off the critical investments that have been made, that will continue to be made, because someone traded away the well-being of the American public and our national security for personal gain, for a vote. No way to run a government and no way to govern.
Hold on. I'm gonna ask Chairman Neal and Ranking Member Boyle as well to comment on this, because I think it is so important that we do talk about what that document is laying the groundwork. It's laying the groundwork toward dysfunction, default, and potential government shutdowns that none of us want. Ranking Member Neal.
Sure, thanks, Pete. Just one quick observation for those of you who have some institutional memory here. You really believe that Republicans are going to embrace a government shutdown? How have the politics of that situation worked out for them in the past, dating back to Clinton Gingrich? If there's one thing that the people that have been on that side for a long time remember, they have lost every showdown over shutting down the government. believe me, they are not going to shut down the government for sure.
Look, we all know in the end what this is about. When Social Security was created in the 1930s, Republicans opposed it. They have opposed it in every generation since. As recently as late 2004, when George W. Bush was reelected. If you remember his first press conference the day after the election, he said, "I have political capital, and I intend to use it." And what was his number one priority? To privatize part of Social Security. Now here we are, and don't take my word for it. Just read the press statements of Kevin McCarthy a couple months ago. Every single one of the Republicans who was running to be my counterpart on Budget Committee as chair, they were all saying they intend to use the debt ceiling as leverage to win cuts to Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. To their credit, they're being public about it. Now, I've worked on this issue my entire time here in Congress, working to attempt to depoliticize this bomb to our economy and the worldwide economy. I'm so proud of this caucus, not just House Democrats, but working with the White House as well. We are firmly united on this. And just as Republicans lost back in the Gingrich Congress in the mid-1990s, just as they lost in 2011 on this issue, they will lose again in 2023.
I just want to make one point. You know, I think you all will recall last December, I was, swarmed with so many of you are in this audience today. I mean, just overwhelming. Are we going to shut the government down? Are we going to shut the government down? This is going to lead to a government shutdown. And just absolute no. We are not going to have a government shutdown. Why? Because there was a willingness to work together with our colleagues in the House and our colleagues in the Senate, in order to be able to fashion public policy that was going to be beneficial to the American people, whether it was their national security, which was their jobs, job training, whether it was veterans, and we came to an agreement. That is singularly the issue of ability to govern. As the chairman said of Ways and Means, that they won't shut it down, but we will wait to see what their process is going to be. We know what our process is going to be and how we're going to continue to move at keeping government moving forward.
Last question. I'm sorry.
Building off of legislation about the IRS from last night, Republicans are now putting forward a bill to entirely abolish the IRS and the federal income tax. Any reaction to that?
I'll let Ranking Member Neal speak, but this it is just fanciful, the depths at which they'll go, and we can talk about exactly what these dollars, what the financial benefit is to the taxpayers to collect these tax receipts. This is about making sure that everybody pays their fair share, and that the richest don't get to avoid time and time again the ability to do that. I'll let Mr. Neal talk a little bit about that proposal.
Yeah, just the facts of the issue. And so Charles Rosati, who's lettered to me 2 years ago, former IRS commissioner under Bill Clinton, he said there's $574 billion annually that goes uncollected. And Charles Rettig, the IRS commissioner, a Republican under Donald Trump, said that number is closer to $1 trillion annually that goes uncollected. Now, what we voted for last night, or voted against last night, was to remain consistent to our position, and that was computer modeling, replacing retired IRS officials, which have been cut by 30% over the last 15 years. We addressed that. And enhanced technology. For those of you who are stuck at airports with Southwest, the one thing you should be reminded about, now the evidence points to technology and the lack of its sufficient upgrade that created the chaos. That's what happens with the IRS. Every year for our local school systems, 200 teachers retire, you replace them. They haven't done that at the IRS. So don't go by what I have to say about this. Charles Rosati, Democrat, Charles Rettig, a Republican. $574 billion. Think of what you could do with that. $574 billion a year that goes uncollected. And back to Commissioner Rettig, who said $1 trillion a year goes uncollected. That's the tax gap.
Thank you.